Okay, so we needed a second part to this. So I was trying to explain with this figure is being given that if you really need something, if you need to see it to help your understanding, then that person probably needs to add a figure. Um, Over here are some other questions. These are about citation. So, are the sources adequately and correctly cited? If not, how? That one's pretty obvious. Can you strengthen any sources, or can you think of any sources that would help strengthen the writer's argument? If so, what and where? Now, for undergrads especially, this doesn't mean, oh, you need to see Smitty 2004 at all. Like, no, you don't need to do that. But let's say you're reading a paper and somebody says the depth of the ice table on Mars at this location is 180 meters. This affects our decision to drill for ice here. That seems suspicious. That's not common knowledge. So there, you would just circle that and you would write, you need a citation for this. This isn't common knowledge. So you don't have to know the exact citation. And then finally, are all the citations in the text also in the works cited? So if you go through the paper and you find that Smith et al. 2005 isn't in the references, but it is in the text, then you need to let somebody know. And vice versa. It actually more often than not happens to me that I have a paper in my work cited that's not actually used, or not to me, to my students, I mean. And so you should also let people know, like, if you're going to use it, you need to cite it. Grammar and style. So this is more thinking about cohesion, thinking about subjects and verbs, and nominalization, things that we talked about in the science writing video. So really basic. Are there any grammatical or spelling problems? And you don't have to fix every one of them. There might be one or two, but if somebody has a lot of spelling problems, and this has happened to me before, just make a note in here. This thing is littered with spelling problems. You probably need to go through and use spell check. Are there any examples of nominalization? So that's taking a verb like to investigate and making it a noun, like perform an investigation. So waste of space. Are there subjects and verbs close together in the sentence? So you want the subject to be closely followed by its verb. Is passive voice used judicially? Hopefully, their writing is filled with active voice. Are the sentences within the paragraph cohesive? Are they all wrapping around the same idea, the same goal? And pointing out where they're not. Are there any needless phrases or adjectives? If they're saying things like, the vast majority of craters lie in around the equatorial regions, it's really just most. Most of the craters are around the equatorial regions. And then this is a really good thing that I add to my peer review forms. I don't know that I've seen other people do it, but I like to ask students next to each paragraph, write the goal you think the writer is trying to accomplish in that paragraph. If you can do that, that actually says something about their cohesion. It's a good test for cohesion. Content. This is where I put the weight and the majority of the time that I would spend on a peer review is the actual content that they're writing about. So for us, in this class, these are going to be some of the questions that I'm going to ask you in our in-class activity. Is the description of the site and its landforms complete? Does the writer describe what they personally observed? Are the areas of interest described in terms of the data that could be collected, the resolution, and the amount? Is it clear which mission objectives are supported? And is the background literature discussed? Is it clear what science questions could be answered, or maybe new questions that could be asked with this new data? Depending on what class you're in the future, this one is going to be the section of the peer review form that looks the most different, because this is going to be the one that's specific to the document that you're reviewing. Okay, now the overall, because we always want an overall. Overall, what are the piece's strengths and what are the piece's weaknesses? I've highlighted pieces in red because I want to touch on this before we close the video out. The writing that you are reviewing, belongs to a person with feelings and emotions, and they are going to, whether or not they're, cold or not, they're going to take your writing, your peer review personally. They're going to think about it at lunch after they've read it, and they're going to hold it in their heart. And I know that sounds crazy. I've published scientific articles, and still when I get peer review, part of my heart is a little darkened after I read it, because I think, oh, I wrote this and they hated it, and it's personal. It shouldn't be, but it is. Part of it is. So when I give a peer review, I try hard to do two things. One, I focus on the piece. I don't say the author should have done this. The subject of my sentence in peer review is not the author. Okay? It's the work. Okay? So the piece's strengths were that it focused on blah, blah, blah. Not the author did a good job of doing XYZ. It's just a way to distance yourself and to keep it a little bit more objective. So I said I do two things. One being that I try to focus on the work and, not on the person. But two, I really try to make sure that whatever advice or whatever suggestions I'm giving them are to strengthen the work, to encourage revision. So here's some guidelines that we should just talk through to make sure that you've got it. And these are from the University of Hawaii. Read whatever you're asked to review twice. Read it once without marking on it at all. The second time you read it, then get ready to mark and comment. Give your partner time. So that doesn't mean actually make them wait for you to get it done. It means they're going to have to turn this thing around, maybe for a class. So if you know that the paper is due Friday, the final paper is due Friday, and you return a peer review Thursday night, you are not a good partner. Okay. Leave nothing blank. So that means on the form, if there's something that you aren't sure of, you should ask, because that person that you're partnered with, they deserve good feedback. Point out the strengths as well as the weaknesses of the document, not the person. Offer suggestions, not commands. If you've got editorial stuff, keep it to the end. It should be appropriate, constructive, respectful, but you want revision type things in a peer review. Be text specific. This is really important. Especially if you've got a word choice problem, you want to point to the exact line in the text. So telling somebody your introduction has some weak points. That's not good. Tell them line 4 of paragraph 5 is weak. Here's why. So text specific. Questions are good feedback. We saw that in the beginning. Don't overwhelm them with too much commentary. So that just means that those overall type ideas, keep them to the end. I'll write that on a separate form. Be careful not to let your own opinions bias your review. This is a big one actually in real scientific writing for publication. If you don't agree with someone, it doesn't mean that their work shouldn't be published. Reread your comments before passing them on. Make sure they make sense or easy to follow, but also make sure that they're respectful. And this is a really important last point. Avoid turning your peer's paper into your paper. Make sure that they are keeping ownership. And again, asking questions of them is a really good way to make sure that they are keeping ownership, because they're responding to the questions. They're not writing your words down. And I really, especially in doing this with students, I don't rewrite anything for you. I want to give you questions, give you suggestions. I want you to keep it your own. It's something that you should feel proud of. So that's how we're going to do peer review in class. Thanks for watching.